The medbay's lights were too bright. Sterile, flickering slightly, always slightly, and reflecting off the polished metal walls with the cold efficiency of a place that saw too much pain to be personal. Dr. Azurek adjusted the collar of his surgical wrap, his mandibles twitching with anticipation and dread. The report had been vague, but one word stood out in bold red script: predator. The arrival platform hummed beneath his feet. Outside the main doors, mechanical limbs clicked and hissed as cleaning drones scrubbed at invisible stains. He hated this part, the not knowing, the waiting, the assumption that everything that came through those doors would eventually bleed, scream, or die. The doors hissed open. He expected a team of human marines. Instead, only one man strode in, tall, bearded, and confident, his uniform half-zipped and boots coated in the rust dust of some distant moon. A hard case swung from his shoulder, but it was the figure that padded beside him that froze Azurek in place. It was massive, jet black, four-legged, with yellow eyes like molten glass. The creature's fur was thick and matted near the shoulder, where a gaping wound glistened with exposed sinew and something darker, something humming faintly with radiation. Its claws clicked against the floor with each step, head swiveling as it scanned the med bay with unsettling intelligence. Azurek stepped back, instinct taking over. His two upper limbs raised defensively, while his lower arms prepared a sedative on the tray nearby. "That thing cannot be allowed inside here," he snapped, his translator struggling to filter out the rising pitch in his native dialect. "It is a Class 4 terrestrial predator. It should be in containment, not—" "Relax," the human said, tossing a calm glance over his shoulder. "He's harmless." A pause. The human turned to Azurek with an easy, lopsided grin. "And spoiled." Azurek's eyes narrowed. His clawed fingers tightened around the syringe. "Spoiled? That is a bioengineered military beast. He's also my dog." The statement seemed absurd, but Jules, according to his patch, spoke without irony. He crouched beside the creature, gently scratching its neck. The beast's tail thudded once against the floor. "His name's Onyx," Jules said, straightening. "He's got shrapnel lodged behind the shoulder blade. Took a hit during the evac on Archeon Drift. I've done basic stabilization, but we need a real vet now." Azurek clicked in disbelief. "And you brought that into my clinic without authorization?" "Without guards." "Because he'd tear through the guards if they panicked and pointed a gun at him." Jules stepped forward, gesturing toward the exam table. "But he trusts me. Which means, if you want to help him, you'll have to trust me too." The alien's brain screamed no. Every protocol, every instinct, every scar in his memory shouted against it. And yet, the creature limped forward, slow and careful, then hopped gently onto the table. A faint whimper escaped it, not of anger, but pain. Onyx locked eyes with Azurek. Not in the wild, alpha challenge way he expected. The look was placid, measured, almost polite. Azurek swallowed his nerves. "Fine, but if it moves without your command, I will inject it." Jules gave a short nod. "He won't." "Sit, boy." Onyx obeyed. The examination began in silence. Azurek activated the scanning panel embedded in the table, which hummed to life beneath the creature. A slow pulse of blue light swept over Onyx, mapping his structure in real time. The displays flickered, analyzing bone density, foreign objects, internal bleeding. A shard of metallic alloy, partially fused with muscle tissue, embedded dangerously close to a neural relay cluster near the scapula. A common weapon in the outer colonies, primitive but effective. "It's not just physical," Azurek muttered. "There's radiation, and signs of mechanical integration." Jules nodded. "Yeah, he's got enhancements. Mostly passive. A few sensory upgrades. Nothing aggressive. He was modified before I got him. I rescued him during a salvage op 2 years ago. He was the only survivor in a destroyed lab." Azurek blinked. And you kept him. He was a puppy. Couldn't even stand. They bred him to kill. But he imprinted on me instead. A long pause followed. Fascinating. Jules smiled slightly. That's one word for it. The scanner chimed. Azurek frowned. The shard had lodged deeper than anticipated, and the surrounding tissue was reacting unpredictably. The radiation pattern was off, pulsing, almost as if the metal were alive. He adjusted the panel. The image zoomed in. Then Onyx growled. Low, quiet, but unmistakable. A warning. Azurek froze. It's okay, Jules said instantly. It's just a scan, boy. He's not hurting you. The growl subsided. Onyx's eyes remained locked on the alien vet's hands. He reacts to emotional tension. Jules explained, softer now. If you get scared, he gets scared. If you act aggressive. I'm not scared. Azurek lied. Jules tilted his head. Then relax your secondary arms. They're twitching. Azurek forced them to still. The metal inside him. It's not standard shrapnel. I need to conduct a deeper analysis. You can. Just go slow. The alien exhaled, or the equivalent of it. His upper limbs gently brushed Onyx's fur, feeling the heat beneath. Not just a creature, a hybrid of biology and machinery, of training and instinct, something beyond pet or weapon. Do not restrain him. Azurek asked again. Not unless you want him to panic. Unorthodox. Irresponsible. Unthinkable. He began the analysis anyway. Onyx didn't move. His breathing was shallow but steady, and his gaze flicked only occasionally between Azurek and Jules. The scans deepened, now venturing into neural patterns, electromagnetic fluctuations. The wound, though severe, wasn't the most unusual aspect. He's forming micro-responses to my probes, Azurek whispered. Like he knows he's being examined. He does. That is not possible. You're thinking with your protocols. Try thinking with your empathy. Azurek bristled. I am a physician. I do not empathize. I observe. Maybe that's the difference between a doctor and a caretaker. Before Azurek could respond, the lights flickered again, just once, and the power briefly surged. Onyx's ears perked. Strange, Azurek muttered. Could be the weather around, Archeon interfering, Jules said, though his voice didn't sound convinced. The moment passed. The scanner signaled completion. You'll need to remove the fragment manually, Azurek said. It's too deep for auto-surgery. And the radiation. I'll need to isolate him afterward. It could be dangerous. Do what you have to. I will need your assistance during the procedure. Of course. They stared at each other for a beat longer than necessary. Onyx, between them, blinked slowly, his tail thudding once more. Doctor, Jules said, his voice level. I know how this looks. But he's not just a mission casualty. He's family. Azurek didn't respond immediately. He turned away, logging the surgical details on the console. His lower arms still trembled slightly. Prep the tools, he said. We begin in 1 hour. As Jules nodded and turned to Onyx, Azurek let his eyes linger on the creature one last time. Harmless and spoiled. The words echoed in his mind like a warning or a challenge. The surgical suite was quiet save for the soft ticking of monitors and the subtle whir of filtered air. Onyx lay sedated on the sterile table, chest rising and falling with each measured breath. His wounded shoulder glistened under clinical lights, the surrounding fur trimmed away, revealing bruised flesh, an angry welt of red and gray. Above him, the surgical interface pulsed with diagnostic data, projecting readings that made Azurek's antennae twitch involuntarily. The human, Jules, stood just behind the sterile zone. His expression was unreadable, arms crossed loosely over his chest, though his eyes never strayed from the creature. Not once. Azurek inserted the microfilament scalpel into the guided incision path. His hands, 2 primary and 1 of the secondary pairs, moved in perfect sync, executing the delicate procedure with precision. Still, something gnawed at the back of his mind. Not the operation itself, but the silence. "Tell me," Azurek said at last, adjusting the angle of his tools. "Why keep him?" Jules blinked. "What do you mean?" "A war beast. Augmented. Dangerous. You say he's family, but surely that sentiment does not survive logic. He could have killed you." Jules gave a faint, dry chuckle. "He almost did." That caught Azurek's attention. "When I first found him, he was half dead. Most of the lab was vaporized, scorch marks on the walls, skeletal remains of other prototypes. I stepped over a tripwire and caught a blast to the ribs. He leapt on me before I hit the ground. Thought I was a threat. Ripped through my gear like it was paper. Then how did you survive?" "I didn't fight back," Jules said, voice quieter now. "Didn't scream either. Just locked eyes with him and whispered, 'Easy, buddy. You don't want to do this.' And for whatever reason, he stopped." Azurek let that settle while he cauterized a blood vessel. "That doesn't sound like instinct." "No," Jules agreed. "It wasn't. Something in him, maybe genetic programming, maybe the part that was still animal, chose not to finish me." He collapsed a minute later. "We both almost died on the floor of that lab. And you decided to adopt him?" Felt like he'd made a choice. One that he wasn't supposed to make. That kind of defiance against what he was bred for. I respected it. Azurek hesitated. It was a perspective alien to him. Compassion, yes, he understood that in theory. But reverence? For a beast? Onyx's vitals pulsed steadily on the screen. No erratic fluctuations. No stress responses. Despite the invasive procedure, his body was calm. "His enhancements," Azurek began, probing deeper into the wound, "are more advanced than any registered military project I've seen. Neuromesh integration, skeletal reinforcements, pain response dampening. Yet, he remains emotionally reactive. He was meant to be a prototype for bonded warfare," Jules said. "Experimental unit. Meant to imprint on one handler only. Trainable, loyal, tactical, like a K9 unit, but with the capacity for independent judgment. And yet he was abandoned. The lab was hit by pirates, I think. Or maybe Black Ops. Either way, everyone inside was gone before we arrived. He wasn't a priority for recovery. They left him." Azurek extracted a sliver of metal from beneath the muscle sheath. It pulsed faintly with residual energy. "There is something else," he murmured, holding the shard in the surgical clamp. "This alloy. It contains an organic interface. Not just embedded. It's reacting." Jules stepped forward, squinting. "Reacting how?" "It's grown fibers. Neural tendrils. Almost like roots. Some form of adaptive implant." "Is it hostile?" Azurek watched the readout shift. The metal pulse synchronized with Onyx's heartbeat. He replaced the shard in the isolator tube. "Not hostile, but sentient. Perhaps semi-aware. It's designed to communicate with the host." Jules whistled low. "So you're saying he's part machine, part bioform, and part something else?" "I do not speculate without evidence," Azurek replied. He sealed the incision with a skin fusor, then activated the biofoam layer. Onyx gave a faint, unconscious twitch, but did not wake. The silence returned, but this time it was thick with something different. Respect, perhaps, or curiosity. Jules exhaled, shifting his weight. "He still has nightmares, you know, of the lab." "I think so. Or maybe of what he was supposed to be. He'll whimper in his sleep, legs twitching like he's running. I talk to him until it stops. Sometimes he'll crawl into my bunk. Just lies there. He hates being alone." Azurek remained quiet as he checked the sutures. The words hung in the air, like dust motes caught in sunlight. There was a tenderness in them, raw and unfiltered, that surprised him. He'd treated 1,000 wounded beings, seen limbs reattached, hearts replaced, lungs regrown. But this was the first time someone spoke of their patient not as a responsibility or a casualty, but as a companion. "His vitals are stable," Azurek finally said. He'll sleep for several hours. I've neutralized the reactive compounds in the shard. I'll need to run a full spectral analysis, but the immediate threat has passed. Jules let out a breath he'd clearly been holding. Thank you, document. I didn't do it for you, Azurek said reflexively. Jules smiled. Didn't say you did. He moved to the table, gently resting a hand on Onyx's uninjured side. The creature's ears twitched at the touch, though he remained unconscious. I've always wondered, Jules said, if he knows I saved him, or if he thinks he saved me. Azurek tilted his head. Perhaps it doesn't matter. The bond exists. That is sufficient. There was a pause. The hum of the equipment seemed louder now. I didn't think you'd say something like that, Jules said quietly. Neither did I, Azurek admitted. Outside the medbay's reinforced window, the stars shifted subtly. The station was moving again, slowly orbiting the fractured planet below. The clouds over Archeon drift rolled like bruises across its surface, dark and looming. A flicker on the console drew Azurek's attention. Radiation spike. He tapped the display. A momentary blip, small, contained, but matching the residual signature of the implant they'd removed. His mandibles clicked. There was a burst. Jules turned. From the shard. No, from within the subject. Faint, but mimicking the shard's energy profile. You mean there's another one? I don't know. They stared at the readout. The spike was gone now. It had lasted less than half a second. Azurek shut the scanner off, filing the anomaly for follow-up. He would need answers. But not now. Now Onyx needed rest. And for reasons he didn't fully understand, Azurek felt he owed the creature that much. Jules settled into the corner chair, arms resting on his knees. I'll stay until he wakes up. You're not authorized to. I'll stay, Jules repeated, not unkindly, but without room for negotiation. Azurek sighed. Do not interfere with the monitors. And if he exhibits neural instability, you will alert me immediately. Understood. The alien turned away, making notes on his data slate. His surgical limbs moved automatically now, cleaning instruments, organizing files, sealing samples. Behind him, Onyx stirred in his sleep and let out a sound. Not a growl, not a whimper, something softer. Azurek paused. He didn't look back, but he didn't leave either. Onyx was awake. The creature stirred with a quiet huff of air, stretching his limbs with slow, deliberate care. His eyes opened, pupils narrowing against the sterile medbay light before settling on the figure beside him. Jules leaned forward, his hand already extended to rest gently against the beast's neck. A low, please sound rumbled from Onyx's chest, a sound not unlike a feline's purr, though deeper and rougher. Azurek watched from a discreet distance, silently recording biometric data. The creature's recovery was proceeding at an anomalously accelerated rate. Cellular regeneration, despite being aided by standard medfoam and inhibitors, was surpassing projections. Even for an augmented organism, it was remarkable. Your dog, Azurek said flatly, is recovering too quickly. Jules didn't look away from Onyx. Fast healing was part of the package. Nanite lattice reinforcement in the blood. He metabolizes trauma like most species metabolize sugar. It's not natural. No, Jules agreed. But nothing about him ever was. Onyx's eyes flicked toward Azurek. No aggression. No fear. Just attention. Sharp and immediate. He remembers you, Jules said. Even when sedated. He knows who helped him. I was not helping him, Azurek replied. I was mitigating a threat. If that helps you sleep better. A beat of silence. Onyx let his head rest on Jules' lap. His breathing was steady, peaceful. Azurek turned to the data pad beside the console. The fragment we removed was only part of a larger system. My analysis indicates a network, a hive construct. It wasn't meant to function in isolation. You're saying there's more of it inside him? Yes, but it's dormant, or hiding. The moment we remove the initial shard, another structure flared to life for less than a second. The energy signature suggests a relay node, possibly an uplink device. Jules frowned. Uplink to what? That is the question. He passed the data pad to Jules, who studied the waveforms and schematics with the grim focus of a man used to bad news. If this thing activates, Jules said, does it control him? Unknown. Can it hurt him? Uncertain. Can it hurt others? Azurek hesitated. Yes, that is within the realm of possibility. Jules ran a hand through his hair. And you still let me take him home with me? 2 years. He slept beside me, traveled with me, ate from my hand. You said he chose you. Azurek replied. So did I. Jules met his eyes. There was a faint flicker there. Not gratitude, exactly, but something adjacent. A mutual recognition between two creatures conditioned not to trust, but learning anyway. Can we remove the rest of the system? Jules asked. Azurek tapped a series of notes into the console. That depends. If the implants are fully integrated, extraction could damage neural integrity. He may survive, but not intact. Then we don't remove them. That may not be your decision. The human stiffened. What does that mean? I submitted my findings to the Interstellar Health Board and flagged the energy signature as a Class 4 anomaly. That triggered an automated alert. The moment they review the scan, they will dispatch a quarantine team. Jules stood, jaw clenched. You reported him. I followed protocol. He's not a threat. Then you should hope they believe that. Jules opened his mouth to reply, but a sharp beep cut through the room. A warning signal. Azurek turned back to the screen. Incoming vessel. Registered to IHB. Jules swore under his breath. Onyx rose to his feet. He didn't growl. He didn't panic. He simply stood beside Jules, muscles taut, eyes trained on the corridor door. He knew something was coming. Jules dropped into a crouch beside him. Easy, boy. It's okay. Onyx made a soft chuffing sound. His ears flicked back. His body remained still, but his pupils dilated. Azurek locked the medbay entrance. I can stall them. 10 minutes, maybe. Can you erase the records? No. The system is centralized. Then we need to hide him. Where? Jules turned to Onyx. Think you can walk? The creature took one slow step, then another. The limp was almost gone. Azurek shook his head. You won't make it past the primary corridor. The security checkpoints scan for organic metal fusions. Then we don't hide him from scanners, Jules said. We hide him in plain sight. A pause. Azurek's mandibles twitched. Explain. Let me re-enroll him as a sanctioned therapy animal. His augmentations get flagged as medical-grade prosthetics. I've got military exemptions. You enter his recovery under the companion support clause. That's fraudulent. It's practical. You're insane. Jules grinned grimly. They'll believe what the system tells them to believe. We just have to feed it the right lies. Azurek hesitated, not because he didn't understand, but because part of him wanted to say yes. Data entry alone won't stop them, he said. They'll scan him directly. Then we need him to pass. Azurek moved to the terminal and began typing. His claws clicked over the keys in rapid succession. Data streams spilled across the screen. Genetic profiles, metabolic baselines, immunological flags. What are you doing? Jules asked. Building a profile. Rewriting the biological markers. Splicing in false mutations. He'll read as genetically unstable, but non-contagious. Add trauma therapy tags, and here. He turned the pad toward Jules. Onyx. Species. Canid derivative. Augmented support animal. Registered handler. Jules Mercer. Condition. PTSD. Post-Archean drift engagement. Jules exhaled. You're good at this. I'm good at everything. The security alert pulsed again. Closer now. Azurek transferred the new files into the medbay's internal registry. They'll still want to look at him, he warned. If he shows signs of aggression. He won't. And if they try to take him. Jules's voice was ice. They won't. The door hissed. 3 figures entered. Armored, faceless, draped in IHB black and silver. A med officer moved forward, a scanner clutched in one gauntlet. Dr. Azurek, the lead said, "We're here to collect the anomaly." Azurek nodded calmly. "You're referring to the companion therapy case." The officer paused. "That is not what was reported. It is what was updated. Revised diagnosis, revised registry. You'll find full documentation under case tag Theta-79. The officer turned, tapped at her wrist console. Jules stood by Onyx, hand resting on his neck. The creature was motionless, eyes half-lidded, breathing slow. Just a dog. Just a support animal. The IHB officer scanned him. A beep. "Confirmed genetic instability," she said. "No viral contamination. Neural augmentation within acceptable limits. Therapy designation acknowledged." Another pause. Her visor tilted toward Jules. "You are the assigned handler." "Yes, ma'am." "Is he prone to episodes?" Jules smiled faintly. "Only when threatened." A long moment passed. Finally, the officer tapped her console again. "Very well. Flag for passive observation. No quarantine necessary at this time." Azurek exhaled. The team turned, exiting as swiftly as they had arrived. When the door sealed behind them, Jules let his knees buckle, sitting on the floor beside Onyx. The creature licked his face. "You beautiful, terrifying, ridiculous miracle," he whispered. Azurek stared at the closed door. "They'll be back," he said. "Yeah." Jules nodded. "But now we have time." Onyx pressed against his side. Jules looked up at Azurek. "So, what's our next move?" Time ran in fractured rhythms after the incident. Days blurred into cycles of testing, planning, and watching. Always watching. Onyx adapted faster than anyone expected. Within a standard week, he navigated the med lab with practiced ease, his gait no longer betraying injury. The dormant system inside him remained silent, but neither Jules nor Azurek mistook silence for safety. They worked from the shadows now. The IHB's visit had sparked attention. More scans, deeper audits, whispered rumors of an unsanctioned predator slipping through security. Azurek rerouted surveillance logs, falsified telemetry, and built a series of artificial trails leading off-world. Meanwhile, Jules devoted every waking moment to training Onyx in new command sets, override protocols, de-escalation cues, and sanctuary reflexes in the event of another awakening. The bond between them was no longer just trust. It was strategy, survival, something ferociously unspoken and unbreakable. But tension simmered beneath the surface. Azurek was quieter, his movements more economical, his voice clipped. Jules noticed the change and didn't ask. He knew what guilt felt like. Azurek was balancing logic against instinct, ethics against memory. The turning point arrived with an intercepted transmission. Azurek found it embedded in an encrypted burst, piggybacking on a subchannel used by customs drones. It was subtle, almost elegant, too elegant for a standard ping. He decrypted it manually, bypassing AI filters, and what emerged chilled him. Jules stood over his shoulder as the message played. No audio, just a string of alphanumeric coordinates and a visual, a grainy image of another creature. Not quite Onyx, but close. Its form was slimmer, posture more vertical, with bioluminescent veins pulsing along its flanks. The eyes were wrong. Cold. Structured. Same tech, Jules murmured. Same builders. Almost certainly, Azurek replied. This isn't a message. It's a lure. Then it knows. More than that, it wants us to follow. They stared at the final screen. It displayed a timestamp, then a directive. Arrival in 84 hours. No interference. Jules closed his eyes. We've been marked. Or tested. I don't like either option. Then we prepare. And they did. Every contingency was considered. The medical lab was converted into a defensive node. force fields reconfigured for kinetic resistance, emergency locks tested and retested. Azurek constructed a neural disruptor calibrated specifically for Onyx's biological frequency, though he avoided telling Jules until it was done. He stored it behind a biometric vault, just in case. They argued, of course, quietly, intensely. Jules refused to let Onyx be treated like a liability. Azurek refused to let emotion cloud judgment. But beneath the frustration lived a mutual respect, forged by necessity. Time dwindled. When the moment came, it was silent. No explosion, no atmospheric rift. Just the blinking alert on Azurek's console. Vessel entry detected in the outer field. They moved fast. Jules readied Onyx, securing a transdermal transmitter beneath his fur. Azurek sealed external access points and primed the disruptor. Every vent, every panel, every exit had been accounted for. Except one. The creature didn't enter through the lab. It arrived inside it. 1 second the room was stable, the next it was there, unfolding from the air like a glitch in reality. Its form shimmered with digital residue, like it had been downloaded rather than transported. Onyx rose immediately, body coiled but not hostile. Recognition flickered in his stance. Something ancient and innate. The new creature took 1 step forward. No sound. Its body was smoother than Onyx's, less battle-scarred, more precise. A living weapon in ceremonial skin. Jules stepped between them. Stay back. It didn't respond. Instead, it cocked its head, observing Onyx. Its mouth didn't move, but a voice spoke, not aloud, but directly into their minds. He was meant to be alone. Jules flinched. Who are you? The voice shifted, now echoing through the lab's internal comms. I'm what you denied. I'm what you buried. He was ours. He remembers. Onyx didn't growl. He sat, still, watchful. He's not yours, Jules said, stepping closer. He chose. Choice is an illusion. He was engineered, designed to return. Your influence is contamination. Azurek moved to the disruptor console. The voice sharpened. Do not. The console froze. Jules clenched his fists. What do you want? Integration. Completion. He is missing parts of himself. We came to restore what is ours. No, Jules said. You came to take. The creature looked at Onyx. This time its head bowed, slowly, solemnly. Your pain will end. Your purpose will begin. Onyx tilted his head. For a moment, no one moved. Then, Onyx stood and approached the entity. Jules stepped forward. Wait. Onyx paused. He looked back, and then he turned to the creature and roared. The sound shook the walls. Not a growl, not an attack, a declaration. The creature staggered back, clearly stunned, and Onyx charged. The clash was brutal and fast. Talons against claws, augment against augment. But it wasn't just violence. It was understanding made manifest. Onyx fought not as a tool reclaimed, but as a creature defending something he had chosen. The disruptor reactivated. Azurek hit the trigger. The pulse lashed across the room, an invisible wave that shattered the link between creature and uplink. The intruder seized, twitched, and collapsed, body dissolving in a static ash. Silence. Jules knelt beside Onyx, who lay panting but alive. His eyes met Jules's. Still his. Still home. Later, they burned the remains of the device that had housed the transmission. No signals. No traces. Just smoke and certainty. Azurek sat on the floor beside them. He made the decision himself. Jules nodded. He always does. What now? We leave. Azurek looked up. Where? Somewhere quiet. He deserves peace. You can come too. A pause. I have work here. Jules extended a hand. You have a choice. Azurek stared at it. Then, for the first time, he smiled. The ship they took was old, slow, but reliable. As it drifted through the outer rim, Jules sat on the floor of the crew quarters, Onyx's head resting in his lap. The stars beyond were unfamiliar. The future was uncertain. But here, in this quiet, a predator slept, harmless, and completely, irrevocably spoiled.